In 1982, human remains were found by a hunter in the woods off DeShong Drive in Georgia near Yellow River Park and Stone Mountain. The bones were determined to be that of a female, along with socks, shoes, a possible blouse, and nylon rope at the scene. It is believed that the rope was used to tie the victim up. At the time, it was estimated that the remains had been out there for 6 to 10 years, but detectives were not able to identify the victim. 39 years later, in March of 2021, after exhausting all available leads, the victim's skull was sent to Othram to have a DNA profile generated. Coincidentally, also around this time, a friend of a woman named Janice Adams encouraged her to submit her DNA in hopes of finding answers to her missing mother. A DNA profile was done, and the results were uploaded to GEDmatch, a database that law enforcement uses for genealogy records. Meanwhile, Othram was able to build a genealogy profile from the degraded skeletal remains, which enabled detectives to connect the unidentified victim to a possible daughter, Janice Adams. Janice was then contacted by police, and she stated that her mother had been missing nearly 50 years, and her name was Marlene Standridge. 5 months later, on August 25, 2021, police reached out to Janice for another DNA sample. In September, Othram used rapid familial testing to confirm that the unidentified bones were in fact Janice's mother. Police said Marlene disappeared in the early 1970s at the age of 22 and had 2 young children. She was described as a hippie and always lived her life to the fullest. Janice never knew her mother and spent her entire life never knowing what happened to her. She grew up believing that her mother had possibly abandoned her, and none of her family members said that they ever knew what really happened. She was told that her mother had just run away, but she always questioned if that was actually true. She has always been bothered by the fact that she has no memory of her mother and no pictures of the two together. She was told by family members that she and her brother were found in Piedmont Park alone after their mother had taken them there the day she went missing. Police believe that Marlene was likely kidnapped in the park while walking around with her 2 children and then taken to the Gwinnett County woods and killed. Janice and her brother, who were about 3 and 6 years old at the time, were found alone by a person walking through the park. Gwinnett police had always considered James Willie Brown a likely suspect in the killing due to his similar offenses in the 1970s. Brown was executed in November 2003 for the killing of Brenda Watson in 1975, and he is tied to at least 2 other killings. Investigators believe Brown was responsible for multiple murders of women over the years, but was only charged and convicted for the murder of Brenda. Similar to nylon cord found at the site of Marlene's remains, a nylon cord at the scene of the other women matched the one Brown had in his car after Brenda's body was found. A police report from that time showed the state crime lab's preliminary report indicated the victim was likely African American, but the DNA testing showed this was incorrect. It is unknown if Marlene's family ever reported her missing. Although her children now know more details and have some type of closure, the mystery still remains: who killed Marlene and what exactly happened? On November 4, 2010, some deer hunters in Stacyville, Maine, came across a badly decomposed body of a man on a logging trail. He was wearing a blue and white cap with the name Chris stitched on the front, khaki slacks, and a plaid shirt worn beneath a dark brown canvas jacket. His body was found located in a working forest with multiple ATV trails and is about a mile west of Maine State Route 11. The town of Stacyville itself is very rural, with a population of only about 400 people at the time. Investigators were unable to get fingerprints because the hands were missing, possibly due to animals, but they did log his dental charts and create a DNA profile. The coroner would determine that by the time he was found, he had been deceased for at least 1 month. He had with him a nylon briefcase containing empty bottles of Dasani raspberry water, Poland Springs water, cranberry juice, 2 cans of off-insect repellent, and a sweater. He was assumed to be a hiker, but the cause of death could not be determined and there were no obvious signs of foul play. He was white and estimated to be in his mid-50s and became known as Stacyville John Doe. Unfortunately, for the next 10 years, he was not connected to any missing persons report. 10 years later, in August of 2020, Sydney Kopp called police with a possible tip. She had heard on a podcast the description of the clothing found on the body, a Vineyard Vines button-down shirt, New Balance sneakers, dress socks, and a hat with the name Chris on it, and she knew it had to be Christopher Roof. She had attended the same church as Chris and was his student when he was a substitute teacher at Concord Carlisle High School in Concord, Maine. Detectives then obtained a DNA sample from his family and were able to match the body to his identity. The last time his family spoke to him was in August of 2010, about 3 months prior to his body being found. Sadly, for the next 10 years, his family assumed that he was doing fine on his own and simply did not wish to associate with them, and therefore he was never reported missing. Strangely, he is not the first member of his prominent family to be found dead in an unusual manner. The circumstances of his death are similar to that of his mother, Marcia Moore. She disappeared in 1979, and her remains were discovered in the woods a distance from her home 2 years later in the state of Washington. The cause and manner of her death were listed as undetermined, just like her son. Chris was born in Concord, Massachusetts in 1951 to Simon Roof and Marcia Moore. Marcia was the only daughter of Robert Moore, who was the founder of the Sheraton hotel chain. Her brother was also famous for his works, such as The French Connection and The Green Berets. When she was an adult, she would separate herself from her family and the family business altogether. She had attended Radcliffe College, which has since merged with Harvard University, before writing a series of books on countercultural subjects like astrology and yoga, well before they became mainstream topics. She eventually gained national attention in 1965 through Jess Stern's book Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. Chris, on the other hand, was a member of the First Parish Church in Concord and shared a hometown with Henry David Thoreau, whose writings of simple living in the woods he deeply admired. Sydney Kopp recalled Chris as beloved by the community of Concord, but because of his love of Thoreau, many people who knew him, including family members, had assumed he had gone off to live in the woods. Sydney stated that Chris was kind and like their very own Mr. Rogers, and that he made a huge impact on kids in their community. Like his mother, he pursued a literary career and has a biography featured in the Concord Public Library, along with a collection of his mother's writings as well. He attended Hampshire College for 2 years before graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Emerson College in 1978. He self-published a number of poetry books for both children and adults, taught as a substitute at Concord Carlisle High School, and served on the Concord Historical Commission in the 1990s. His mother also had a connection to Maine. In 1947, she married Simon Roof, an aspiring writer, and the couple moved to Concord in 1950 and had 3 children, including Chris. According to her biography, she then went on to remarry 3 times, including to Mark Douglas. Several of her books, such as Diet, Sex, and Yoga, Reincarnation, The Key to Immortality, and Astrology in Action, were co-written with Douglas. She lastly married an anesthesiologist named Howard Altonian and moved to Washington State, where they lived a reclusive life, experimenting with the drug ketamine, which is used in anesthesia and known to have powerful hallucinogenic effects. However, she disappeared in the winter of 1979 at the age of 50, and her remains were found 2 years later in the woods near her home. One theory is that on a winter night in the forest, she had injected all the ketamine available to her, became unconscious, and died of hypothermia. Her lower jaw was later identified via dental records. Strangely, her skull had been found with a hole in it, and one of her friends suspected it was a bullet hole, but investigators believed it may have happened due to the skull's exposure to the elements over 2 years. However, this information was not immediately published by investigators at the time of the discovery, and the actual cause of her death remains unresolved. Shortly before disappearing, Chris had donated a collection of his mother's personal writings to the Concord Library in 2009 and had donated his own writings in 2007. Although his first name was on the cap he was wearing when his remains were found, he was most likely not identified due to the fact he had not been reported missing and because his body was found over 300 miles from where he lived. 10 years later, thanks to Sidney Kopp, Stacyville John Doe would finally get a name, Christopher Roof.